Hello, and welcome to this short bite-sized CPD session. And we'll, as we sometimes do, bring a bit of a change to the normal technical CPD session and bring you something on management and soft skills. So my name's Nikki Clough. I'm delighted to run the session, bite-sized session for you today. So what we're going to do is a session on feedback. Let me just share my screen here. Here we go. So why have we chosen this session? Why have we chosen this topic of feedback today? Well, a few reasons really. It's one of the most commonly raised topics that, if you like, on the wish list when people come to us and ask us about delivering some soft skills, some management skills training, we also do some coaching and so on, is delivering effective feedback. Why? Well, obviously it's something that's critical for performance improvement. It's something, as I'll come on to, that sometimes people find quite difficult, but it's really, really key for developing and retaining people. And that's such an issue we're finding at the moment for many, many firms, is attracting people is an issue. And actually, once you have, and certainly once people are qualified, perhaps holding on to those people. So thinking about that, why is feedback so important in that process? And I'll just share with you a few stats here. This is something from a piece of work a while ago, to be fair, by McKinsey on the war for talent. And it's a bit old, but it's been updated a few times. And one of the questions they asked was, well, what does a modern professional want? Now, not just accountancy related, this across many fields, but these are some of the things that they found. And the top one there, as you can see, 87% of their respondents were saying, we want candid and insightful feedback. And in fact, the third one there, regular articulation of my strengths and development opportunities. So it's not just positive feedback, it's not just encouragement that was wanted, it was constructive feedback as well. And indeed, as you can see, the other three there are all around, actually, I also want great people to work for, and I want to have a mentor, and I want to have somebody who's going to help me, give me that feedback, help me shape my career. So feedback, developing people, very, very key to being able to retain people. So topics we'd look at, again, in this relatively short session, we're going to look at some of the benefits, probably already told you about one, of giving feedback and also getting feedback. We're going to look at why it can be so hard, and how to get over that, and also then look at some top tips about when it's useful to give feedback and what it's useful to give feedback about, indeed. How to do it, go through a kind of a little model for you, how to give feedback effectively, and just at the end, what to do with feedback when you get it. So let's start off with benefits of giving feedback. And I'll start with this one, kind of drawing on the theme of development there. So this is something called the Johari window, developed by a couple of psychologists, one called Joseph and one called Harrington, in fact, so Johari window. And what they said is, okay, well, here we are. There's things that I know and that other people know, and that's in what you might call the arena. Everybody knows this about me. There's things that I know, but other people don't, that I'm keeping to myself. So that's kind of the facade. But critically, there's things that other people know, but I don't. And that's my blind spot. And in order to develop, I've got to get into that blind spot. And in fact, if I can, perhaps be confident enough to lower the facade a little, to push into that unknown area. It's that unknown area there that's my development area. It's what I don't know I can do yet. So if we expand our arena of the stuff that we do know, then we can get into that blind spot, lower the facade, and actually that's how we develop. And how do we do that? Well, certainly sometimes it does involve us lowering our facade a bit, perhaps being a bit more open. And what I'd say is that certainly firms, organisations that have an open culture, that deliver feedback to each other, it's just part of the normal way that they do things, that tends to be, people tend to feel safer to be more open about themselves, about their behaviour, about their development areas. Really, really important for development then. And also get more information about their blind spot. So really critical in getting and giving feedback in order to develop. One or two other things, probably fairly self-explanatory, but if you do give and receive feedback regularly, then you address any problems and issues, maybe frustration sometimes, not bottled up. So that's really good for people's kind of mental well-being in the workplace. If there's something that's not working well, ineffective actions, well, that should improve, know about it in order to improve. Also there, let's always think about balancing not only the hard feedback, the constructive feedback, but the positive as well. People have got to know what they're doing right in order to keep on doing it. So you need to reinforce existing positive behaviour. If you're doing that, it means the team knows what's expected of them, and more importantly, what's not. And actually, if there is this culture of feedback, generally teams feel more valued. People are noticing what they are doing, and they're giving them feedback based on that, so people know that people have noticed, and that tends to increase the way that people feel valued. And all through that should be a drive to performance improvement. So good things. So given that, why is it so hard? Why do people find it so hard? Why do people talk to us so much about, feedback? It always comes up on, always a request on every course that I do. And I think the key thing is that it involves people. And where people are involved, emotions can be involved, particularly if it is constructive or hard feedback that's being given. And that's out of your control, how the other person perhaps might react. And that gets a bit uncomfortable. So many people think of giving feedback, particularly say constructive feedback, as one of those difficult situations. And what does that mean people do? They tend to push it down the road a bit. They tend to avoid it. I looked at some work by a lady called Anne Taylor, who's written a lot about leadership, particularly for people who she describes as analytical leaders. And certainly I would describe a lot of people in the accounting profession as perhaps an analytical style of leader. And she came up with a number of reasons as to why people find giving feedback hard. Have a look at some of these. This is around constructive feedback, whether it rings any bells for you. People said, I don't want to upset somebody, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to demotivate them, particularly when we're trying to retain staff, actually, or you can hold back from giving feedback. What if I get it wrong? I don't have the time. Or actually sometimes, I had to learn it for myself. So should they. And I don't understand why they don't get it. It's so obvious to me. You're obvious, somebody else is obvious, are not always the same thing. But obviously that's usually our starting point. And I just didn't get round to it. That's a classic, I'm pushing it into the long grass, I've avoided it a little. And it's not actually just constructive feedback that people can avoid. The piece of work I'm thinking of, and looked at why people also don't give positive feedback. I've used the word affirmative feedback there. I said, yeah, thank you, great. Surely that's enough. Why do I need to to stroke? Why do I need to give more praise? Nobody ever given me any praise. What if I do give praise and then what are they going to expect from me? A pay rise, a promotion? Surely they know already I value them. There are a number of things that I had to say. What if I get it wrong? That's what I pay them for anyway. So, yeah, people don't give positive, affirmative feedback enough. There's some research that says in a positive feedback culture, typically people give positive feedback compared to constructive or negative feedback. A ratio, I think it's 6 to 1. Yeah, and not enough firms do that, I think, to let people know when they're doing a good job, to let them know that they're valued. So see if any of those ring bells for you. So what can we do about it? So feedback's a good thing. It's going to help you with your development, help you with your retention, can be avoided. Don't necessarily give feedback enough. So when should feedback be given? Now, a lot of accounting firms have quite a kind of a structure for giving feedback. Quite often that feedback's written. Quite often that feedback is at a certain point. It might be part of somebody's personal development review or appraisal, or sometimes it's after every particular piece of work, maybe if it's an audit job or something. Now, there's nothing wrong per se with written feedback. Certainly that can be quite useful because it can give people time to articulate what they want to say and give the other person time to read that feedback and understand it. But if there's not a conversation that goes along with that, you can be missing a trick. And sometimes when we rely just on written feedback, there can be a gap between the action or the behavior or the piece of work that's being addressed and the actual feedback being given. And that's definitely missing a trick. Not saying don't do that, but I am saying, what about trying to get more of a feedback culture? What about more conversations? Can be sometimes off the cuff conversations. Can be, I really appreciated in the moment, really appreciated this piece of work that you did for me. It was accurate, it was on time, it was easy to follow. Thanks very much. So not just saying thanks, great job, but you're giving them some information as to what it was you appreciated, reinforcing that positive behavior. Or perhaps, great, thank you for doing this piece of work. I did find it difficult to follow. And this particular section here, I'm not particularly clear what you meant. I wonder if you could have structured it in this particular way, and actually next time, perhaps run it through with me first. So in the moment, particularly with constructive feedback, can be much easier to deliver and to receive, and perhaps more likely to result in some quick improvements rather than waiting a few months sometimes before actually you realise that the piece of work that you submitted, wasn't quite all it could have been. So not saying don't work on written feedback, but just don't save all that up for somebody's development review. Conversations in real time will actually, really help. So what about what to feedback on? And actually, I'll kind of say here that really often things go wrong at the beginning. And often it's the briefing and the objective setting that actually can be improved. So no apologies for bringing up here SMART objectives. It's a bit of an old chestnut, probably taught this the first day at KPMG, which is where I did my training, but it still hangs true today. So has somebody had a proper briefing? Did somebody know what the expectations were for the particular piece of work that had to be done? What was, what they had to actually achieve? So if you have done that, and you've had a conversation, it's actually going to be much easier to give the person feedback because you've got something to set against the piece of work that they were asked to do. Yeah, so you can go back to the briefing, you can be checking in, this is so important as well for delegation, checking in with them to see if they're hitting the mark. And certainly they're different people use different words with SMART. I particularly like using track rather than timely or time bound for the T, because what that means is that we can actually have kind of objectives along the way, and it gives you the opportunity to check in with somebody and give them feedback as the job is perhaps progressing. What else do we need to think about with what you're feeding back on? And what you want to be careful about is that you are sticking to facts and you're largely giving feedback on somebody's behaviour, what they've actually done and how they've done it, rather than perhaps their identity, their character, the person themselves. So this is this iceberg model. And what we see is that the way somebody behaves is on top of the surface there, and that's largely that can be driven by a lot of sort of 2/3 of what you perhaps don't see, which can be their values and their beliefs and their education and their experiences from the past. Now, those are the things that people can't really change. They can drive the behavior, but actually the things that are visible, yeah, they can work on. So, you know, somebody has made an error. Perhaps that's because in the past they hadn't learned that particular technical area. Well, they can work on that. They can learn that. They can go away and mug up on that particular technical issue, perhaps. So giving the feedback on, okay, this was wrong, what can we do to correct it, rather than, you know, well, you were lazy, you know, you didn't know, you were inefficient, you know, you were foolish. That perhaps is not particularly helpful. So thinking about the behavior, what you can see, and give feedback about that. So how should you deliver it? So little model here, number of models out there for delivering feedback. This is a really simple one that works very well for me. Give an example, so stick to facts, example or piece of evidence about what you see. So again, the example I've been given about, you know, perhaps a report somebody's written, so refer to that report specifically. Then talk about the impact or the effect it's had on you. So this piece of work was, I was very pleased with it. It was easy to read. I understood the points you were making. I can see how you've improved since the previous report that you did for me. Or, no, I didn't understand the points you were making here. For me, I didn't follow the points. They didn't appear to be in a logical order. Yeah, so I'm very much saying, from my point of view, I'm not trying to get into the other person's head and saying, yes, well, you were lazy, you didn't think about how to present this report, you didn't think about what would be a logical order, because I don't know what's in that other person's head. I can only comment from my perspective. And then going on to say what change, or indeed if it's positive behaviour, what you'd like them to continue to do to affirm. Now, this is all from my perspective, or from the person giving the feedback perspective. We'll say later, actually, it does need to be kind of a two-way process as well. We want to invite the other person to give their reflections and to self-assess. That can be something that's really powerful. You know, getting somebody to kind of reflect on their own performance can actually, particularly when it's tough feedback, sometimes do half the job for you. So that's a good model and particularly helpful for constructive feedback. And some more tips, things that should some of these are fairly obvious, the little and often part. So again, don't wait for the 6 monthly appraisal, perhaps. So make it part of every day. It makes it much easier to both give and receive feedback if it's just a normal part of the working day. I say focusing on behaviours, not beliefs. So this is that, commenting on how the report was structured, not a comment about whether you thought the person was lazy, hadn't worked very hard on it. Just thinking about the output there. Make sure that it's factual. The balance of positive and negative, or affirmative, do it again, or constructive, let's do this differently. And I say you need to try to give more positive, affirmative feedback to make it easier for people to accept the constructive. And that should be supportive, not threatening. And the ask, don't tell, that's really very important in terms of the asking the other person to self-reflect first, to self-assess first. That can be incredibly powerful when somebody, then when there's hard feedback to give. And obviously planning when and where, saying that feedback culture, open culture, but actually if there's a tough message to give, then perhaps in the open plan office isn't great. And I suppose I'm just going to sort of finish off with my kind of, I suppose, biggest tip, which is listening well. This is a bit of Stephen Covey, which is anybody who knows the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, fantastic tips in that piece of work. But he would say that our job always in managing other people is to seek first to understand and then to be understood. So the ask first and then tell, so get the other person's perspective and listen to what they're saying, and really listen. Don't just wait your turn to speak. Really try to understand what it is they're telling you. Doesn't mean you change your mind about the message you're giving, but actually if they believe that you've heard them, then it can give that, it can mean that message is much better received. So asking the person, okay, what was your, here's the report that you've written for me. What was your feelings about it? Do you feel this is your best work? Perhaps getting them to assess how they did it, and you can get some quite useful information there. So just a very short session there, just sort of thinking about feedback, why it's so important to both give and receive feedback, thinking about why it could be hard. Certainly you're not the only person. If you find feedback hard, then you won't be the only person. Thinking a little bit about when to give feedback. Often would be my plea. What to give feedback about. What's useful is to give feedback about people's behaviour, about the work that they do, and try to steer away from giving the feedback to the person they are. So that's just your perspective. Thinking about a model of how to give feedback effectively, EEC, so evidence, effect, change or continue. And then what to do with feedback. And I'll just finish there with a trite phrase: feedback is a gift. Feedback is a gift. And indeed it is. But just like any gift that you're given, it's your choice what you do with it. If you never get it, especially if it's something that you didn't know, then you're missing out. But once you've received it, you decide whether to change or continue. So the person giving the feedback can suggest and tell you what they would like, and whether you take that on board and you change your behaviour, that's up to you. So think about that when you perhaps are giving feedback, that actually, although you can work with a person and ask them to do something in a different way, it's going to be up to them whether they take that on board. People are different. Sometimes people take a while to absorb feedback. They might need time to go away and think about it a little bit. If you're receiving feedback, it can be tough to think of it as a gift. But feedback rarely comes from a bad place. Few people wake up in the morning and think, how can I be mean to somebody today? If somebody's taken the trouble to give you some feedback, it's probably because they want you to do better. They think you can do better. They're interested in you. They're interested in developing you, and they want you to improve. Sometimes it may mean that you need to go away and, give that some thought before you decide what to do. But true feedback really can be a gift. And if you don't get it, you don't have any opportunities to think about your own development. There you are. So hopefully, short little session on feedback. Hopefully there's some useful points there for you to think about, and encourage you to both give and receive more feedback. So thanks very much.